So today we're talking about pricing models and monetization systems for startup success. If you guys have not attended any of our sessions before with Mucker Capital, Mucker, we are an early stage VC firm. We focus on the seed and Series A stages, and we also run an accelerator program called Mucker Lab. And part of what we do to give back to the community, as well as our own family of portfolio companies, is we hold these monthly sessions, these webinar, we call them the growth series webinars, where we invite some of our partners in to talk about a hot topic that matters for our startup community. And today, obviously, we're talking about pricing. But before I introduce our guest speakers for today, let's cover a couple of housekeeping items and we'll get started. Okay, so the first one, just probably the top question asked in every single webinar on Earth in the history of webinars is probably this, which is, are we recording this session? Yes, we are. And we will be posting this probably in a few days' time. We'd like to try to get it within a day, but sometimes we get backed up. But it will be posted on the mucker.com website in the blog section. And we don't gate it. It's just going to be fully published, full recording, all the slides. Don't feel like you have to ask your note taker to join. To get notified of that, we do encourage people to subscribe to our newsletters at mucker.com. So if you want to get notification of when it's published, make sure you subscribe there. And then one last thing before we jump into the content itself, many of you have already found the chat box in this Zoom UI. If you have questions at any time during the presentation, utilize the question and answer box, the Q&A box, because we're going to be focusing on that for fielding questions from all of you. So make sure you use that box for questions. And we'll try to get to it throughout the presentation. If we have some time at the end, we'll address any unanswered questions as much as we can. Okay, so with that out of the way, let me introduce myself briefly, as well as our guest speakers. My name is Tony. I run the growth practice here at Mucker. That just means I have the privilege of spending time with our founders and working together with them to make sure that we're on the right track from a go-to-market standpoint. But really, the star of today's show are our friends Jeff Tjiok and Jack Benson from Simon-Kucher. I'll let them talk about more about their practice and their firm, but essentially they're the pricing experts, and we're so thankful to have them join us today. So Jeff and Jack, thanks for being here with us. I'll turn it over to you, but I'll definitely jump in here and there with some questions from the audience.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Thanks, Tony. I can go ahead and get started. I'll pass it over to you, Jeff, after that. Jack Benson, nice to see everyone. I'm a senior manager here at Simon-Kucher, typically based out of Southern California, but up in San Francisco here today. Like Jeff, I am aligned to our TMT practice and actually the head of our Monetizing AI Center of Excellence. So with the times, very excited to be here and present the materials here today. Go ahead, Jeff.
Awesome. Thanks, Jack and Tony, Justin. Thanks a lot for having us. Super excited to be here. I'm Jeff. I'm a partner out of our San Francisco office. I'm aligned to our TMT vertical. It's really living and breathing software and more recently AI monetization over the last 10 years. I think I'm probably somewhere close to 100 projects. And for us, this type of forum is always a nice way to give back and share some of the experiences that we collected. And so, yeah, I'm really looking forward to this one. Awesome. Cool. So we won't spend too much time on the next slide, but those of you who haven't heard of us before, so we're the world's leading commercial advisor. So all we do is really thinking about revenue growth, not or rather than cost cutting. So a lot of our projects, a lot of our topics are around pricing monetization models. But the way we look at it is like pricing or monetization without the right execution is just an academic exercise. And so we do a decent amount of support in the go-to-market area. So think about sales enablement, incentive schemes, channel strategy, and so on. We're like 2,000 people, I think closer to 2,500 people strong, more than 200 partners in more than 30 countries. So we've been around for a while, longer than I've been around for 41 years. And it's really threading that needle here. Okay. Awesome. Then let's actually jump right into this session. And before we get into what exactly we are covering and the detailed topics, just a brain teaser, so to speak, to get started. It's really, what do these two products have in common, right? And on the left side, the Google Glasses design, interesting design, I would say, at $1,500. On the right-hand side, MoviePass, almost too good to be true, unlimited movies for $9.95. And if you think about that for a second, in terms of see design, you see a certain price point on the left, you see primarily an extremely attractive price point on the right-hand side. If you think about that, Jack, if we move on to the next slide, what these two both have in common is they failed because monetization was an afterthought, right? On the left-hand side, nobody asked who would be willing to pay for this. Is this actually an appealing design? And is it an appealing design at this price point, right? And a lot of startup founders think about product market fit. So that's question number one. I would have my doubts on the first one here already. But then it's not just the product market fit. It also becomes a question around product market price fit, right? So for example, if I ask you, Tony, are you interested in a cup of coffee? Say sure. So you got a product market fit. But if I ask Tony, are you interested in a cup of coffee for $25? Then probably you will think twice about it. And that's what we mean by product market price fit, right? So that's on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, if you see something like this, the extremely attractive offer, like the big question is really, is this a sustainable business model? And are you capturing the value that you're providing? And so in that case, if you have to buy every single movie for $15 and you're giving them away for $9.95 unlimited, the answer is pretty easy, and that's how a company like MoviePass pretty much went out of business. And so our big takeaway, and that's really the preface for everything that we're going to discuss over the next half hour or so, is price before product, right? Monetization is really not an afterthought, but price before product is really the key success criteria. You'll see a lot of different concepts, different models. Jack knows all of this inside and out. And you guys probably will never have to go into all these details, but the one thing that you have to walk away, or that I hope you're walking away from this session, is really price before product, right? Don't make it an afterthought, but make this really a discussion that you are very early in your product innovation lifecycle. Cool. All right. So with that, let's actually go into the topics, and I'm super excited to hand this off to Jack in a second. And the way to think about these topics that we have prepared for you today is, if you think about the work that we do day in, day out, Jack, myself, and the rest of the team, a lot of it is going really deep, right? On like digging into transactional usage data, like talking to customers, prospects, getting surveys out. And those are really helpful tools when you're talking about companies in the ballpark of, let's say, $50 to $100 million and above, right? You have a certain baggage, you have a certain product portfolio. Maybe you had some M&As in the past, you had some like different price models, different price metrics coming together, creating complexity. A lot of you guys, earlier stage, you don't have all the baggage, right? And that means also we have to be less detailed, and like the methodology, and whether it's you do a qualitative interview series or quantitative study, matters a lot less than just getting really the foundation right. And that's what we really want to focus on, thinking about building the monetization engine that works, really thinking about what is the right price model for you, thinking about what is the right packaging structure that then enables land and expand, but also how do you actually take control of your customers' life cycles. So very tactical, how can you actually make sure you make it easy for customers to adopt and grow with you over time. Some of the advice that you'll see here is really, I call it timeless basics. And some of those insights that you'll see are even in the context of AI, just because it's obviously something that a lot of you guys are thinking about. So with that, without further ado, Jack, why don't you take it over?
Yep, thanks, Jeff, and great introduction to the topics here today. So the first piece that we'll dig into is building a monetization engine that works. And we use the word monetization instead of pricing for a reason. Because when people think of pricing, they often think of the right-hand side, which is how much am I charging for this? And Jeff gave some good examples to start off this session around they were charging maybe not the right price point for those offerings. But at Simon-Kucher, we actually argue that the left-hand side is even more important. How do you charge? What is the model? And more specifically, what is the metric, the unit of value that you're using to charge for your offering? And I know some of you might say, I'm not sure I agree with that. So let me prove it to you. Don't take it at face value. So let's start actually off with price model, and then we'll touch on price point here in a second. So let me present a thought experiment. Let's say you're in the market for a software that optimizes your organization spend on, say, AWS or Azure or Google Cloud. How would you rather pay? Would you rather pay by percent of annual cloud spend? So that means every single time you spend more money with AWS, you also have to pay your other provider because they're optimizing more of that money. Okay, that's one option. The second is, how about percent of every dollar saved? So ProsperOps actually does this company here that we're looking at. And that means ProsperOps only makes money when you make money, and they just take a cut of every single dollar saved. Now, I don't know about you, but for me, option two is a much easier sell to me or a CFO. And it still results in the same total cost of ownership, say 10K per year. But the alignment of value that you receive from the product is much more closely tied to the second metric here, which is percent of every dollar saved. That's the power of choosing the right metric. And if we extend that conversation to the price model, we actually did a survey, Simon-Kucher, a couple of years ago, and we asked, how would different buyers prefer to pay? So we have a $10 item here on the left-hand side and a $200 item on the right-hand side. Identical product. But as you see, depending on the price point, this answer could actually materially change. When it's only $10, a 50 cents flat fee is preferred. But at at a $200 item, people actually prefer a percentage. It sounds more appealing. So these customer preferences and behavioral ways of thinking about pricing actually do have a material impact on the sales motion and how you're going to market. So we encourage people to, and especially early stage startups, to think about what metric and how am I charging that's going to most align the value that I'm giving to the customer and also still capturing my fair share in order to build a sustainable business model. Start with the metric, then we can talk about the price point. And if we take a quick segue into the world of AI, the first thing to know is it's hard. It's challenging. It's changing and evolving every single day. As a lot of you, I think in the chat had mentioned that you're an AI company. How do you monetize something that is a novel invention? AI can mean so many different things. And what we found through our studies is actually first on the left-hand side, even the most prominent figureheads and leaders in the AI, Gen AI, and agentic AI markets are struggling to know how to price and what will make money. And that actually extends to the rest of the market as well. We conducted a study where 75% of agentic AI providers also admit that they are unsure how to price their solution. So it's a difficult value proposition because it is a new market. And to compound on that, it also introduces something that software companies haven't had to deal with materially in some years, which is the aspect of COGS. Providing AI to your customers does come with a cost of goods sold. And there needs to be a monetization vehicle and mechanism that ensures that you can have an accretive margin and build a sustainable business model that is future-proofed, handles that cost, and ensures a margin so you can continue to operate and scale your business over time. Now, I know that might sound scary. And so what is the answer to pricing AI? We actually run an annual study every year at Simon-Kucher. We call it our annual software study, where we conducted a survey with hundreds of buyers across all different types of geographies, sizes, etc. And what we found is 76% of buyers actually signal acceptance for AI specifically on usage-based and outcome-based pricing models. So as opposed to just seats. Now we still see ChatGPT and the Claudes, really the trendy hot companies, they still price per seat on a lot of these types of products. But there is appetite in the market for more usage-based and outcome-based models. And one of the trends we are actually seeing in particular as it relates to usage-based and outcome-based pricing is the introduction of a credit system, which companies like Figma and Notion have introduced in order to monetize the number of different use cases that come with an AI offering. And if we take Figma on the left-hand side, how they set it up is it's helping them in multitude of ways. First, they're able to address the core question, which is how do I monetize AI when it can do so many different things and it introduces costs into my business? You provision out credits. Credits are drawn down based on the actions and how you use the AI. That's the first piece. But second is, yes, there's been some narrative in the market on the SaaS apocalypse, and is the seat dead? Not necessarily. And Figma actually uses those AI credits and says, hey, if you upgrade to a higher tier seat, we're going to give you more AI credits as a result. So not only are they monetizing their AI and ensuring positive unit economics on that part, but they're also able to sell higher tier seats, which provision out more credits. And how do those credits get drawn down? That depends on what exactly you're doing with AI. And we expect more and more use cases to come out, right? Right now, there's just changing the font or generating an app on Figma. But what AI can do, specifically agentic AI, is tapped to have a plethora of use cases. And what that means is it's going to be difficult to find a metric that works for every single one of those use cases, hence the introduction of this credit system. And Notion has actually taken a step in this direction as well, where they a few weeks ago released the Notion custom agent, which was met with, we'll call it mixed reviews in the market. But essentially what they did is they said, it's going to be difficult for us to know exactly how you'll use the custom agent because there, again, are a plethora of use cases. So your drawdown or how much you are being taxed as it relates to those credits will depend on a number of different factors. And we want you to use the custom agent for a number of different things. And if you use it more or there's more compute tied with how you're using that agentic AI, then there will be more credits that are drawn down from that system. And that's how they monetize agents.
Hey, Jack, we have a question from the audience that I think you're starting to touch upon. So let me ask you this question now. In talking about these metrics, like value metric or pricing metric, a lot of our startups are early that we're working with, at least at Mucker. But in the life cycle of a company, right, there's companies mature. So how do you think about whether or not that metric or a series of metrics changes over the course of how companies mature, whether it's new product releases, which happens on a frequent basis. And also, what are some, if you can share any, what are some practical things that you would recommend a founder who is new to this to try to find out what kind of metric they should really focus on? Like, how do you learn? What kind of data should you be looking at?
Yeah, great question. So I'll start with the first one, which is how your product is used and how value is gleaned from your offering. Yes, can definitely change over time. We just saw Clay, for example, go and they actually, what they said is they had a release from their CEOs who had a pricing video and they said, look, the way people actually ascribe value to our product has materially changed. And it's possible over time where you may start with one metric, whether that be because that's how value was created when you initially started as a startup, or two, sometimes a more complex metric is difficult to gain traction within the market and or requires extensive product telemetry, et cetera. So you might opt for something simpler as a starting point in order to get off and running and drive adoption. Maybe seats based is the answer. But as your product continues to evolve, and this gets into your second question, Tony, and you're starting to actually talk to customers, understand the use cases of your product and your offering, then you're able to find both, yes, doing usage data analysis and doing maybe actually just talking to customers on how people are ascribing value to your offering. And then your metric might change. Now, I do want to caveat when we're talking about a metric shift or change, that is a significant, almost business model transformation. We're seeing that a lot in the market where people are trying to move from seats to usage. And it shouldn't be taken lightly because the way that the sales force is incentivized, the way that marketing and product needs to be built, that should come together and push the metric as a single unit of value that is really your customer or your company's story on what the value that you're generating is.
Yeah,
Cool.
I think
Awesome.
it's a really good question. And the only thing I'd add to that is it really goes back to first principles, right? What is the value that customers are getting out of the solution? I think it really boils down to that piece. And you may have some ideas, but ultimately you really want to talk to a couple of customers, a couple of prospects, like how that actually resonates. And I'll just give you one example, right? Very, very young company I worked with recently, like 4 million ARR in the AI SRE space. So think about production engineering or agentic AI for production engineers. So if you have an alert or an incident in your software, like it helps you pretty much investigate what's going on, helps you propose solutions. Like that solution, if you price that based on users, it would be extremely simple, but it would be shooting yourself in the foot right from day one, because that solution will actually help you do the work with less engineers, right? So if users is off the table, then you really have to start thinking about what is actually driving value for customers. And in that case, the value for customers is, well, number of alert investigations, right? The more alerts I have, the more value I get out of it, because I can automate more, or the more incidents I investigate, more I get the value out of the solution. And incidents are higher value than alerts, so you have to put a different price points behind it. And so it's really a very first principles type of conversation that we would encourage founders to have, and actually use customers and prospects as a sounding board.
Cool. Thanks for that input. I know we have a lot of content to cover. Let me just ask one more question from the audience related to credits and usage-based pricing. This is from Alex. Hey, Alex, glad you can make it. So Alex's question is, with usage-based pricing, the risk is that usage might fluctuate month over month. And how do you address that in terms of revenue forecasting? Because as busy founders, they need to know how much revenue are we going to be able to meet or drive next quarter or end of the year? What are some things that someone like Alex should keep in mind and perhaps mitigate for major fluctuations of usage, perhaps whether it's due to seasonality or just individual customer use cases?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and we could go on a whole rabbit hole on this one, but I'll try to keep it mercifully short. I think the main thing that a lot of folks have a hard time wrapping their heads around is there's the concept of usage-based pricing, which is you price based on how much you consume. But there is also the notion of pay as you go versus commitment, right? And so where a lot of the market is actually heading, even in the usage-based world, is towards a commit model. I think most customers, except for, let's say, some small customers that just want to kick the tires on a solution, but especially if you move up market to more enterprise type of buyers, you want to get to a commit model. Is, well, for a company of your profile, typically that's a commitment of X. And I think the tricky part that AI and usage-based models introduce is getting that first estimate right. And I think that's where folks have to get more comfortable with taking a first shot in the dark, right? So a company of your profile typically would use this much. And then from there, you move and adjust over time, right? Where you say, if you end up using a lot more, we figure out after 1 year you used a lot more, then we true you up at the next year. But what you really try to minimize, if possible at all, is that in-year fluctuation, because again, like from a forecasting perspective, that's going to be really tough.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. All right, let's keep going because we have a lot to cover, and we'll try to address some of the other questions related to this topic of credit when we have time later on.
Yeah, thanks for jumping in, Tony. I'm glad our point got across that how you charge is more important than how much, it seems. But let's talk about how much. So how to get to the price point, and this is oftentimes the question we get from a lot of startup founders is, how much should I price at? What is the price point that makes sense for me? And the first question we need to revert back to is, what are you trying to achieve with your pricing strategy? The good news is there's only 3 options, but first you need to know what your strategy and goal is as a company as it relates to pricing before we can address how to get to the precision right price point that makes sense in order to achieve that goal. So the first goal could be penetration, maximization, or skim. For penetration, think Amazon. This is launching at a low price to gain market share fast. The goal is acquisition of customers, even at the expense of profitability. And that could be a play for some of the early startups who are trying to get a foot in the door in especially competitive and crowded markets. That is a way in order to achieve that goal. And the second is maximization. So this is the central goal of maximizing or finding the optimal point, which drives the most profit or the most revenue for your business. And that will sacrifice some customers who would have been interested maybe at a lower price point, but you intentionally keep it a bit higher in order to find that revenue or profit optimal point. The third option is what Apple has done, which is skimming. So skimming is essentially the strategy where you start off at a high price at initial product launch in order to capture the high willingness to pay of those early adopters, the people who are really excited to try out a new product and willing to pay more as a result of that, and then gradually reduce the price over time in order to tap more of the market into the offering. So before we talk about how much do I price my product at, first, we need to know what the strategy is, one of these three options. Once your company has decided which one merits going forward with, then we could talk about, okay, how do we get to the price point? And the first thing we say is just go out and do it. Go out and talk to your customers and potential prospects about pricing and bring this into your conversation earlier. This goes to the point that Jeff was trying to drive earlier, which is there is going to be a reaction to price, of course, and sometimes we prefer to keep it towards the end of a negotiation cycle or to the end of a conversation. But that mindset is you're hoping to monetize something as opposed to knowing that you're going to monetize it. So go out and talk to customers and prospects, actually try it and be okay with trial and error in order to figure it out. The second approach, which is a bit more methodology, and I think pricing sometimes has the stigma of it's more science than art. For sure, there are scientific instruments that you can use and analyses you can do in order to get to precision optimal points. And much of that is what we do at Simon-Kucher to ensure when we're talking to businesses of 50 million, 200 million, or even more than that, what is the exact right price point to ensure that we're maximizing whatever our target goal is. And that one of those approaches is what you're seeing on the screen here, which is what we call a Van Westendorp. So take a second with this chart. What you're looking at is the x-axis are, of course, price points. And the y-axis is what percent of customers find that price point either acceptable, expensive, or prohibitively expensive. So let's bring back our strategy conversation. Again, if you're looking at this chart from Amazon's perspective, you might say $50 is the right point, right? That's where before that, it's very acceptable to most of my customer base. It's not expensive really yet. So that might be the goal. Whereas if you want to be a premium provider, you might say 150 is perfect because that's where it really drops off completely in terms of acceptable and where too expensive starts to hit the mark, jump up. But really where profit optimal or revenue optimal will be is probably around that middle part where the yellow line and red line shoot up. That's what we call a psychological cliff. So the jump from 99.99 to 101 is a psychological cliff for your customers here. And that's where you'd likely price your product, which is below that $100 mark in order to use those behavioral economics. And the third way is an even more complex but accurate exercise, which is what we call a conjoint. So this puts people into actual real life buying situations, and you see a product offering with some functionality, and then you pick which offering you would want based off of your evaluation of price versus value. Which one makes sense to you? All that to say is when it comes to choosing the price point there, you can get as complex or as simple as you would like. For most of the startups and folks on this call, the one thing to take away is in order to actually understand what the ramifications are, have a couple of customer and prospect conversations, do some internal analysis, but don't boil the ocean doing every single complex methodology. Sometimes inertia is the enemy, and we actually need to just go out into the market, try something after we feel it's relatively good in terms of strategy and development, and go out and try it in the market to see what the reaction is as a result of that. To leave you on this monetization engine section, we'll talk through a 30-day checklist, which are things you can actually go out and do in the next 30 days to understand what monetization engine might work for you. And the first is to long list relevant price metrics or fencing metrics that reflect the value of your offering. As Jeff said, what is the value of your organization or company? And what metrics reflect that value? The second is brainstorm your price model. Determine whether another structure fits better. Do you need two metrics because there's two value vectors for how people glean value out of your organization? The third is if you're offering AI functionality, please run the math on the COGS. This will bite companies in the butt if not thought through and baked into your price architecture early on. Make sure you can offer this sustainably at scale. And as you grow, your customers grow with you. The fourth is actually go out and talk to customers and prospects. Have a conversation with them on some of these topics where it makes sense. Understand how they're gleaning value out of your offering. They actually sometimes have very good insights into what metric makes sense and how they would prefer to buy. So go out and talk to them. And fifth is decide what is the central pricing strategy you and your organization want to achieve. Is it penetration? Is it maximization? Is it skimming? And then build a price point that works in concert in order to achieve it.
Cool. A couple of questions if we can camp on this slide just for a minute or two.
Yep.
I'm going to summarize a couple of related questions. So one of them is tied to COGS and especially with AI. One of the questions is, what are your thoughts on a fixed credit burn per action versus a dynamic model? And let me translate that. Claude, that's a great example. If you use Opus, it consumes more credits than some other models. What are your thoughts on having different levels of credit consumption based off the action used? And then related to that, how does that, I guess, how do you determine what to charge other than from a COGS perspective? Does that make sense? Like from a benefit and value delivery versus cost?
Yeah, great question. So to the first one on fixed versus dynamic, what I would argue there is fixed makes sense when you know the use case and the action and how people are going to glean value even before you launch the product. For example, if you have a use case specific agent that does one thing, like inputs data into a structured format, that's a good example of a fixed model. Dynamic is where really the use case is up to the user. So if we take the Notion custom agent, we have no idea how people will use the Notion custom agent. It could be used for anything under the sun. And so when you're first putting that out into the market, really the only thing Notion is concerned of is I don't want to lose my lunch by offering this to the market. And that's where the dynamic drawdown makes sense. So more complexity and the use cases are multitude of use cases, then dynamic drawdown will make sense in those situations. That being said, it's fluid, where as you recognize, oh, people are using my agents to do A, B, and C use cases, I can then take that out and put that as a fixed drawdown based on a more use case value aligned metric as you start to understand the market a bit more. And then I think, Tony, your second question was on COGS specifically, and how do I design a credit offering? Is that right?
Yeah, and as it relates to pricing with COGS as part of the consideration versus the flip side of it, value delivery, perhaps to a certain use case or.
Yeah, it's a great question. And for this one, where the first thing is have the telemetry in place to know what it costs you to run a certain agent or run a certain LLM as a result. That's the starting point to ensure that whatever the price point or price mechanism that is ended up deciding on, you can weigh the pros and cons against the profitability. And where there is more value, actually transformation and proprietary AI that your organization has built, that's where we should aim for a more positive margin. If we're simply passing through the cost of using Claude's API, that's really it. We're more of an infra middleman, similar to how Clay did it with their research models recently. They're just passing through the cost of that. That's all, not taking a markup on that. So if your organization is adding value through AI, and there's a reason that you should go to your organization for their AI as opposed to just going to Claude directly, that's where we should be attempting to get more in terms of margin and markup as a result of the value we're bringing to the table.
Cool. Thank you. Let me ask one quick question and in interest of time, let's keep going. So talking to customers, is there a minimum number of customers that you recommend someone talk to?
Jeff, any thoughts?
I think if you start with one, you've already done more than, of course, like the more the better, right? If you can mobilize a survey and you get 1,000 responses, be my guest, go for it. But I think where I see personally still a lot of founders struggling is even get that one customer in and have that straightforward conversation with them, have that honest talk with them. And the key is that the earlier you have that conversation, the less it feels like a negotiation. If you're in a negotiation and you ask them what's your willingness to pay, that's a little late, right? But if you're talking about, I have this product idea, I'm thinking about rolling out this feature, thinking actually this might actually increase the value of my product by 30% because it helps with automation, you need less people and so on. What do you think? You will get a reaction. Oh yeah, that's a total no-brainer because my headcount cost is X. Or they will think, no, actually for that price, I can also just integrate with a cloud and build it myself or something along those lines. But that's the feedback that you only really get when you talk to customer. And so get very practical answers one, but then like the more, the better.
Yeah. Cool.
Okay, cool. The only point here very briefly before we move on COGS is I think oftentimes what we see is folks over-rotating on COGS. And don't get me wrong, COGS is super important. Like you need to have a business model, profitability model that works for you. But the price model really should take into account or should primarily focus on what scales with value. And in many cases, if COGS is a concern, then you have to think about how can you integrate that piece into your price model. And I'll just give you a very easy example, like API calls drives costs in many businesses, right? But API calls is not a price metric that people like to be charged on. And so in many cases, what you can do, for example, what we've done for one of the data providers we worked with is you track by monthly active users on your website, but you put a high watermark in terms of number of API calls that you can have, right? And that way you protect your costs, but you still primarily charge based on the value that the customers are getting from your solution. Okay. All right, so with that, let's actually move on to packaging and just a couple of things. Again, like thinking about what is the packaging, like how should you think about the right offering structure, the right packaging structure to drive your land and expand motion. And if we just start with an example, and this is a company that we worked with a couple of years ago, most of you might have heard of them, Patreon. It's pretty much a membership management platform for creators. So let's say you have a rock band or you have a blog, you want to engage with your fans, but also you may want to collect a little bit more in terms of money than what you would get if you just engage with them through Instagram and YouTube. And the problem that they were facing is they pretty much had a one-size-fits-all packaging and pricing model, right? It's like everyone on the platform was charged 5% on any payments that they've gotten from their members. And if you double click on actually who is on that platform, like who are like the creators on Patreon, you see actually very different profiles. Like on the left-hand side, the Hypnotic Beast. Right? I thought that was a pretty interesting one. You can pretty much go into his YouTube channel and do some hypnotic exercises to become a wolf or a lion or whatever you want to be. So let's say it's a little bit more niche, around 2,000 subscribers on YouTube. And Hypnotic Beast, like what he cared about is just fans supporting him, like tipping him pretty much so he can produce more content. Hypnotic Beast. But then on the other side, you have someone like Neil deGrasse Tyson, right? Who like a TV personality with Star Talk on National Geographic, Netflix, and so on, like more than 1 million subscribers. He's looking for something totally different. He doesn't need to collect tips or anything on Patreon. He wants a platform to manage his business, to interact with his fans. So see, same product or like same product that they're using, but with very different needs. That's how we approach this when you go to the next slide in terms of really creating an offer that addresses those different needs. So you have a light/pro offer that is just enough for the Hypnotic Beast, right? It does the job in terms of tip jar, so people can, like members can pay something for exclusive access to content. That's all they need. But then for a Start Talk, there you go more towards a premium model where you actually get a dedicated partner manager, like you can do merge through your account. You get team accounts because Neil deGrasse Tyson doesn't manage his Patreon himself, but he has a whole army that manages it for him. And so you really need to think about what are the different customer segments that are actionable and that have distinct needs that you can address with your offering structure. So that's number one. It's really thinking about customer segmentation in the context of coming up with the right packaging structure. Another area that is really important, and we see a lot of startup founders making the same mistake, which is that if we go to the next one, is you pretty much don't think about the upgrade path like early enough, right? So it's like you build a great product, and you may actually give away most of it for free, right? Like you want to drive adoption, you have a free product. So if 80% of your value sits in the free product, then the incremental 20% that you have to build to get them on a paid product is really an uphill battle. So you really have to very consciously think about what do you put into a free or into a basic product, and what do you gate behind higher tiered plans. Zoom is an interesting example, right? So anyone can start using Zoom. It's very easy to set up, to get started, but if you have a business or you use it for professional purposes, you probably need more than 40 minutes of meeting time, right? And so that's a very natural upgrade path. And now more recently in the context of AI as well, like there are some customers there fine with just limited use and a little bit of a trial of AI capabilities, but then others are really leaning into the idea of AI note-taking and like meeting summaries and all those type of features. So again, you create upsell motion from basic to pro, and the same applies, of course, for pro to business, right? So really thinking about your upgrade path very early on is absolutely critical here. Okay. You see, actually, if we move to the next one, that actually can be quite an effective strategy, especially if it's happening in public. It doesn't have to be quite that obvious, and I'll leave it up to you to figure out what actually was the real reason for an upgrade. But again, like just creating clear differentiation in terms of tiering between your different offerings and how you envision customers to expand over time. It's really something that you want to think about early on. Okay. Cool. So then the question that many of you will have, so that all sounds great in theory, but how do I go about this in practice, right? How do I think about creating the right offerings, the right tiers? And that's where, Jack, if we go to the next one, that's where the burger comes in. And before some of you get hungry or distracted and wondering what a burger has to do with SaaS pricing and tiering, the way to think about that, if you go to McDonald's, right, the way you purchase in McDonald's, or what you get in McDonald's is the burger, or the reason you go to McDonald's is the burger. But very few people actually just go to McDonald's and eat the burger, right? Like usually you have a meal with it that comes with Cokes and fries. And so the way to think about it is, what is your leader product, right? What is the product or the leader product or the leader feature and that people come to you to purchase? In McDonald's case, it's very simple. It's the burger. But then the interesting question becomes, what is actually the filler product, right? The product that people probably like, very few people go to McDonald's just for the fries. But if the fries are bundled in together with the burger, they would actually be interested to buy it and to pay more. And so that's the combination of products that you're looking for, right? What is the right combination of leaders and fillers for your different segments to drive the best possible adoption of the packages? And what you want to avoid is a killer product, for example, a coffee, right? Like especially if you go like late at night, like who wants to eat the Big Mac with a coffee? Very few people, right? But there's some that want the coffee and some that will go to McDonald's just for the coffee, in which case you position it as a separate add-on. But that's really important to think about it in that concept of like, how do you package things together? Package the leaders, package the fillers together. And maybe just to give an example from the software world, if you think about Slack, what you go to Slack for, you go to Slack for the chat function. But will some of you be willing to pay more for some AI functionalities like summaries and some automation? Probably, right? And so that becomes the filler. But then let's think about something else like HIPAA compliance. Not everyone needs that. If you're in the healthcare sector, you probably need it, but for everyone else, that would be a killer. And so really think about what is the right combination here to make packages as appealing as possible to your different customer segments. All right, and then just to round out this section, and of course we can't talk about anything here without talking about AI, so we'll touch on it in this section as well. I think many people have a question, right? That especially if you started with a, let's say, traditional software product and now you're adding AI. In many cases, the question is, what do I do with AI? Is AI like available to everyone? Is AI only available in higher tiers? Is AI available as add-on? And really, the way for us to think about it, it really depends based on two main factors, right? Number one is how differentiated is the business value to the customer, and what is the expected adoption? And I'd say the horizontal axis is almost more important, right? Because the expected adoption, like to some extent, you want to push it into more customers' hands. And so where a lot of our focus is on like how differentiated is the business value. Let's say, for example, you just provide a summary function or some query function, pretty much like a ChatGPT embedded in your product. That is not extremely differentiated, right? And so in many cases, you make that available to the broader audience. You could either have it gated in terms of how much you can use it, and then like beyond a certain usage, like you'd have to pay for it. Figma does that, for example. Or if it's a very differentiated value, let's say, and that's where we get into some of the agentic capabilities, right? Where like you get into automation, or there's something around security governance, which of course is absolutely critical with AI. Then you're talking more about something in terms of positioning as a premium tier. And oftentimes the answer is not either or, but it really depends on what feature set in what, like which of your AI features you're looking at to decide what goes where. And in some cases you have that separate add-on. I'd say 12 months ago or so, when AI was much more niche, that was like a lot more common. More recently, like you look at, for example, a Notion or a Slack that all had separate AI offerings, you just see more and more of that convergence towards integrating it into either your existing package or into a higher tier plan. All right, Tony, do we have any questions or do we want to move on?
We do have questions, but let's move on. By the way, this is a
Okay.
money slide for anybody who is paying attention. Definitely dig into this slide a little bit more. Let's keep going.
Cool. Then let's just wrap up this section here again with your 30 days checklist. So think deeply about your customer segments. Even if you think I'm super small, what we typically say is one size fits none, right? So really think about who are the target segments for you in mind. Then when you think about your product offering, really break it down into concrete building blocks that you can start to assess in terms of what do I think is going to be a leader, a filler, a killer by segments, and have couple of conversations again to validate your thinking. And that, of course, will drive then how you package your products together. In many cases, like you go with a traditional good, better, best, right? If you see there's a increasing hierarchy of needs, but if you see some customers need a product A, some need product C, but they don't necessarily scale together, then you have a more modular structure. So then the importance of the features and the products to your customers really matters, deciding what structure makes most sense. And then also think about AI and how it fits into your product portfolio. Cool. Jack, you want to take it away? I think we can probably keep the last section relatively short just to make sure we still have time for one or two questions from the audience.
Yep, sounds good. So the last section is more tactical in nature. When we talk about the mantra of software, it is land and it is expand. So what are some tactical levers that you have at your disposal in order to improve how often you land and how much expansion you can drive once you're in? So we'll start on the land side, which a lot of software companies and a lot of startups we see typically offer a free tier, which Jeff showed an example of Zoom's earlier on. But a free tier can mean different things. On the left-hand side is what companies like Zoom do, which is actually give away part of the portfolio in a freemium offering. Some companies like HubSpot and Duolingo do a free trial, credit card or no credit card. And then companies like LinkedIn offer promotions or discounts in order to drive acquisition. So there really is a range of options at your disposal when designing a free tier. And there are different benefits and trade-offs that your organization should make when deciding which one makes the most sense. Another process when it's more of a sales-led growth motion is how to structure paid proof of concepts. Because freemiums might work, but what we often hear is, I don't love free trials because I need some time to figure out if it's going to work, or I need to know the features and understand it in my environment in order to understand if this is what I want to buy. So a question we often get is, how do you design them? And we think there are 6 aspects to designing a proof of concept or a pilot. Pricing is one of those 6. So there's scope, time box, ensuring, and this is a big one on success criteria, ensuring there's alignment between you and the customer on what defines success. Then pricing, of course, what we'd recommend here for most companies is charging a % of ACV. With 100% of that pilot fee, if they do end up converting, that's credited to the first year of their contract. Then configuring what is the mutual commitment and what is the off ramp. How do you exit a proof of concept and pilot in order to ensure that it is a time boxed exercise where a decision point is reached? Then if we flip over to, okay, now you're actually in, the customers bought at least some of your offering. How do you expand? Get them to buy more. First, getting them set up and activating the product within their environment is of critical importance. And depending on if you offer this on your own or not, there are different ways that you can structure services when it relates to implementation. And a lot of companies we typically work with have all flavors of this spectrum here, all A, B, and C. A is more of a one-time implementation fee, so very simple, straightforward. And C is something that scales based on unit of effort. This is typically bordering on custom SOW territory. But probably for companies in this call, it makes sense for more of A and B, something that's a bit more productized in service in order to just get them up and running and activated on your product. And then once they're gleaning value, we often see success with customer success tiers where it can actually be a revenue generating lever. This is an example of Okta, how they structure their success tiers, and they have basic, silver, and gold. And they communicate the value of gold very explicitly, but they also charge a percent of ARR because it is a win-win mechanism. There's greater realized value and ROI, as you can see if you buy into the gold tier for Okta. And Okta also actually makes some money off of it and ensures you're receiving and know what value you're getting from the product. So we see structured customer success packages as also a big win-win opportunity for companies. So food for thought. And that concludes the 30-day or this section. I'll leave it with a 30-day checklist, which is one, design your free tier with care. Need to give enough value without giving away the house. Second is build the default POC offering and monetization strategy. So when you have one come in, you know what to do. Third is select an implementation pricing structure that best fits based on your market needs, how your company is set up, and whether you offer services. And fourth, understand how ongoing customer success can fit in and how to package that effectively. Jeff, I'll pass the baton back to you to close us out.
Thanks. Yeah. So Tony told us no advertising. I'm going to do it anyways, just for our two books. If you guys, or if you all thought this was interesting content, of course, reach out to us. But we do have two books that really go into details on all these topics that we discussed, right? Monetizing Innovation, that came out 10 years ago. That's really around what is the right product and how should you think about monetization for those products? What should you build? And again, like how should you price it? Scaling Innovation came out last year. That's more about how do you actually scale your company, right? So you have a successful product, but how do you scale that into a successful company? That's Scaling Innovation. So those really go very well together and build on a lot of the content that we discussed today. And you also find us on LinkedIn, Jack and myself. So feel free to just add us, follow us, and we're posting regular topics, especially around AI. Stay tuned.
Awesome. All right. There were a lot of questions we didn't get to. For those of you who still have burning questions, definitely reach out to Jeff and Jack via LinkedIn. Yeah, I'm sure they can help you guys there. Let me just ask one quick question and then we'll wrap it up, okay? Because I get this a lot from my portfolio companies, which is how much consideration should you have for competitors and how they price into your own pricing model? So I'll leave that question like that.
That's a good question. The short answer is you can't do pricing without keeping competitors into consideration. But you really like a lot of the focus is about what is your differentiated value, right? Like how are you different from competitors? And if you have a different value, a differentiated value from competitors, there's no reason why you have to orient yourself to their pricing and or like the way they go to market. And in fact, you can actually use that to your advantage, right? If you look at Intercom, like they disrupted the entire service market by saying our differentiated values, our AI can resolve cases much faster than anyone else. So we are going to charge based on number of resolved incidents. And so I think let's really think about it in a way of how can we be different from like how are we different from competitors and how can we actually take advantage of that when we think about packaging and pricing.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. All right, let's wrap up with the final slide and then we'll call it a day. So again, okay, we cover, as I mentioned at the top of this webinar, that we do these sessions once a month where we focus on highly educational focused presentations to teach about a particular topic that is pertinent to our founder community and startups. So if you have any specific topic that you are interested in, just email my team member here, Justin, at that email. Again, you could also contact Jeff at his email on the slide here, as well as my email. On the previous slide, their LinkedIn with the QR code. Again, we are recording this and we will be posting full recording as well as all the slides on the Mucker blog, probably in a few days' time. And then lastly, if you are a founder and are looking for not just capital, because you could get capital in a lot of different places, but investments, but also hands-on help with growing your startup, well, we encourage you to apply to submit an application to Mucker, not just to Mucker Lab, but yeah, we're always open to helping the founder community. With that being said, thank you, Jack and Jeff, for spending a good full hour with us. There was a lot of content that we covered, a lot of questions that we didn't get a chance to answer, which just goes to show that this is a very important topic and top of mind for a lot of our founders. Thank you all for joining us today, and we'll see you at the next one. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Bye.